And yet I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
Welcome to Against the Grain, where curiosity leads the way.
Hello, Bert. Good to see you, mate. How are you doing?
Great, Kerry. That's a long time that we actually saw each other, but it's great to be connecting again.
Yeah, definitely. I think, when was the last time I spoke to you? I think I interviewed you when I was in Mexico, wasn't it?
Oh, man, that's a long time ago, I think. Because how long are you back from Mexico?
I've been back just over two and a bit years now. So, yeah, I think it was so it's about 3 years ago, something like that.
Oh, man, time flies. Scary.
I know. So, what have you been up to then?
Wow, yeah, what I've been up to. Mostly I wrote 2 books. One that was published in 2020 and one that was published this year, actually, in 2024. And that's what I've mainly done. I'm working on all kinds of other projects, but they are still too immature to actually put it out in the world.
So the latest book was the Tesla one, right?
Yes, okay. Hunting Tesla, yes.
Hunting Tesla. And is that crop circle related, or is that
Totally not. No, it's actually, it started as a movie script, and the movie is going to be made in a whole different way, but it's going to be made. But it took so long that I decided, you know what, I will just put all the material in a novel. So it's just a really interesting and exciting story. And one of the things that I try to touch on in that book is, how does our future look like? Are we willing and capable of working together, or are we staying in the me mode, which will go nowhere, I think. It's just when we cooperate that will be much better. And the book is a little bit touching that.
It's funny you should say that, because I did a podcast last night with Andy Thomas, and having read his book, The New Heretics, he goes through the conspiracy theorists and on the one hand, and the mainstream on the other hand, or people who are sort of somewhere in between. But he says basically we've got a polarization where one side won't listen to the other, won't look at the data of the other, and when we're fixed, and no one's looking at the nuances or the shades of grey in an argument.
Oh, interesting. I do believe actually that's going on. And I don't know what the solution is. And it's even worse. In my book, even though the people that work together win, the big question is, will they stay doing this, or will it always go to the situation that one of them thinks, you know what, I can take some advantage of this, I can make money out of this, or whatever, I can gain power through this, and then it falls all apart again. Is it just something that we can really achieve, or are we innate so bad as humans that in the end we fall back to this really animalistic state we are in when we are totally losing everything? So
it's a good point.
I don't know.
I mean, it's basically the absence of truth, isn't it? Whilst I mean it is, isn't it? The lies that are being told now, barefaced lies by politicians, in different areas and so on, and they don't care. It seems they don't care.
They don't care, no, because it's just about them. And so as long as that is in place, it will not go anywhere with humanity. The only way I think out of this is that we all look at each other and think, this is ridiculous. We should do it together somehow. Even though our spiritual development can be very individualistic, can be just an I that develops. But somehow, if we as a community do not work together, then, that's it. I think there's no hope. And sometimes I feel sorry for people that are born right now, because I see it going in the wrong direction. And I'm a little older like you, and I had a great life. And I think, wow, how lucky were we?
Yeah, I know. It doesn't look good from so many angles at the moment, does it?
Let's stay positive. Let's see if we can change that here.
Well, this is it. And so, what I was going to say was, I watched Joe Rogan the other day starting to turn the tide. Did you see it with the Graham Hancock and the so Graham Hancock, he had Graham back on and an archaeologist who's been sort of disagreeing with everything that Graham said in his documentary on Netflix about the ancient civilizations, and they both were in the studio, and Joe Rogan mediated, and there were a couple of, it was a 4-hour 20-minute podcast, and there were a couple of times where Joe Rogan thought, oh, we better cool this down, let's get a cup of coffee, but they carried on. and in the end, big respect to them, because they had differences of opinion, but they treated each other like human beings. Good. and they left, it was very positive at the end, and we need more of that, don't we, Bert?
Yeah, that's very good, actually. No, I've not seen that. Yeah, that's actually the direction we want to go. Yeah,
exactly. So I've been reading.
Yeah, and oh man, most people do not get to halfway, while actually it starts after halfway. It becomes then it puts it all together. So
I'm just about to get to chapter 8 that you've been promising all the way through it. Wait till chapter 8. And I flicked through to it earlier because I'm on page 110. I only picked it up last week.
Let me see. I have it here, of course, as well. So let me see where 110 is. Oh yeah.
Okay, so you've just been going around. You've just been telling a story about the church, and the Jesus picture, and the coincidences that led you in different directions from that. So let's go back to
that's actually this where absolute knowledge is.
That's it. I mean, I'm a big fan of Carl Jung, so I flicked through and I saw his picture and I thought, that's what's promised for chapter 8. I'm going to do it.
Yes, and so when you get to that, to chapter 8, then you will suddenly realize what all the other chapters have been there. So in hindsight, perhaps I should have started with chapter 8 and just say, okay, now that you know this background information, let's now look at reality and how it is in our day-to-day life. Right. I decided to do it the other way around and built it up to chapter 8. I do a lot of lectures, and then I noticed that before the break, when I talk actually about the first part of the book, it's great fun. Well, there's all these jokes in that. And then after the break, it becomes serious. And I can see people first thinking, oh no, he's becoming so serious now. In the end, it actually ends good. But yeah, it's a much more serious situation suddenly. And it goes much deeper. And that is where I think the real secret lies. Jung was really ahead of his time.
He really was, wasn't he? He really was. I mean, his quaternity of mind, the thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition, and his book Man and His Symbols, which, I mean, I loved Marie-Louise von Franz. I mean, she was the main person that sort of edited that book for him, wasn't she? But her phrase, the primary architect is number. Architect. The primary archetype is number. Really goes to the core of what we're dealing with here, doesn't it?
Yeah, and somehow it's because Jung wrote, of course, a lot about archetypes. That was his invention in a way, his discovery. He is saying somewhere that for him, the archetype of archetypes is actually geometry, and a very specific geometry. He actually states it's squaring the circle.
He does state that, does he? Where does
he does state it? I have it in my book. I cannot just by heart now tell you where he does write that, but my book has all these annotations, so you can actually look it up and see where Jung wrote that. I don't know that so by heart, but he did write that down actually, and I was surprised when I found that. And when you read chapter 8, so for all the people who are reading the book, you would think it's about geometry, it's about shapes and geometry, but in the end, it's actually not. These shapes and geometry have a much deeper meaning, and in chapter 8, I try to explain that. So it's not a geometry book. If people have put it away thinking, oh, this is just mathematics, pick it up again, because it's not actually. Its shapes are very important, it's very archetypal, but it's not about the geometry. It's about what this geometry does to you. So forget about all the mathematics. Just feel, what does it do with you? And Jung wrote really beautiful stuff about that.
So I was talking to Scott Onstott last week.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And his book that he wrote last year, Sacred Geometry, Philosophy and Worldview. I don't know if you've had a chance to pick up a copy yet and have a look at it.
You know what? I read it very little. It's really bad, but I'm not not a good reader. I'm just a good writer and storyteller, but not a good reader.
Well, it's not a big book, so you could read it very quickly.
Okay.
So he talks about, so we were talking about how do you make the leap, right, to somebody? Because if you say to somebody, geometry is about philosophy and it's about psychology and it's about, goes to the core of who we are, people can't make that connection, but people can't see. There's a massive...
Actually, there is actually a way, and I do it in my book. So Jung, Carl Gustav Jung, he ran into the problem that he had patients that he could not talk with because they were deeply depressed or they were schizophrenic, all kinds of reasons. So, but he wanted to know what they were feeling inside. So what he did is he let them make paintings. And the first paintings were very dark and really what you would expect. Mm-hmm. But then painting after painting, the series would change. And all the patients went through that same process. They would get more colorful. And in the end, it would become really incredible geometric. And Jung came to the conclusion that when the human psyche expresses itself from the deepest level, it will do that in geometry. And so he was totally surprised by that. So geometry is the language of our soul. And then he did some research and he found the Chinese alchemists that used the same, but the other way around. They used the geometries to go inside. And so that's a really important part of Jung's research, that he came to the conclusion when we express ourselves, really basically it will be in geometry. It's really not nice for people who are right-brained, especially women have a problem with this sometimes. But it's how it is.
So Csikszentmihalyi, the psychologist who's a specialist in the state of flow, he says in his story that he was at college and he was just, I can't remember, he was looking for something to do and he saw that there was a lecture on UFOs. So he thought, I'll go along and have a look at it just for fun. And he went along and it was actually being held by Carl Jung, the lecture.
Oh, yeah.
Because as you know, he wrote a book on UFOs.
Yes.
And in that talk, he said that he'd, and this may be what you're talking about as well, maybe connected to what you're talking about. He said that there were a lot of patients he had that were traumatized from the Second World War, and that they were seeing geometric patterns in the sky. And he believed that the rebuilding of their psyche after the trauma was revealing this geometry that was kind of
that is likely connected. Yeah. Jung wrote a whole book about it, about mandalas, because actually they were painting mandalas in the end. And so Jung has a book that's totally dedicated to this process that these patients then in the end make these beautiful geometric mandalas, which are very much like crop circles. Really fascinating when you see them.
And so there's this reflection, isn't there, of the geometry that we're talking about then that's connected to the construct of our consciousness in some ways.
Yes.
And the outside world, the universe.
Yes.
And it's the fact that there is a microcosm and macrocosm going on. What we find outside in, for example, the structure of nature, flowers being fivefold, for example, or the Fibonacci sequence being in our teeth and in pine cones and pineapples and so on. We find that archetype of number that's behind how many petals there are, or what we've decided to draw as a symbol for a number, is inside us as well. And it goes really. There's really strange elements to it. For instance, John Michel and
me too. We looked at Stonehenge, and John Michel was one of the very first to realize that squaring the circle was encoded in Stonehenge. And then I looked at it and I saw actually more connections. But now we get to the question, if that's true, did they purposely and consciously put that in Stonehenge, or was it just done on intuitive basis? So this is a really interesting situation in Stonehenge, because I cannot believe that the builders of Stonehenge thought, you know what, we're going to put squaring the circle in it. We're not going to tell anybody. And then in 5,000 years, somebody will come along and will discover this. I'm not even sure they were aware of that whole phenomenon of squaring the circle, but still, it's there. And I think they tapped some intuition or whatever that motivated them to do it that way. I mean, I find it totally fascinating that it happened that way. And it's not only in Stonehenge. There's many places where you will find it, and I'm sure that whoever built it did not put it in it on purpose or just consciously, that they thought, let's just do this and that will make it more powerful. So why is it there?
You think that's the same case with the CERN building that you found the square in the circle?
Yeah. And in CERN, that's of course, I think that's still a strange coincidence. But then again, the whole book is about that there are no coincidences. I find it more fascinating that I found it also in the landscape at Avebury, Silbury Hill, along Barrow. There's something in the landscape that reflects this same geometry. But that's a landscape, and that's not human-made. That's just made by Mother Earth, and still it's there. It's really archetypal. I find that fascinating. So it's not about mathematics and that, but it's something that's there. Yes, it's shapes, it's geometry that is very archetypal, very basic, and very deep ingrained in our being. And I find that fascinating.
And so, okay, let's talk about, for those people that are, tuning into this and like we used to say, didn't we, for years, what does this square in the circle mean? And we used to go, well, we don't really know,
I don't.
So you get people like refer to it, like Michael Glickman used to say, oh, well, the circle's the symbol for heaven and the square's the symbol for earth. Yeah. And you go, okay, well, they're just symbols then. And what does that mean? What does it mean to people, so that we can say it in a way that moves them, that goes, I'm involved in that, I'm connected to this? Do you know what I mean? This is about me.
Yes.
Because I don't think people get that.
So let's have a look again at Jung and at what everybody knows, synchronicities. That is the fact you think of somebody and you have not thought about that person and for a long time. And then minutes later, the telephone goes and it's that person. And you think, oh, wow, that's a coincidence. And we call that a synchronicity. Now, there's two elements to this synchronicity. And Jung was very specific about that. He said there's a physical element, that's that person calling. And there's a non-physical element, that's you thinking of it. And always, with every synchronicity, there's a non-physical part and a physical part. And in the end, when you really study this whole array of synchronicities, you will see that premonition, precognition, remote viewing, they're all different expressions of Jungian synchronicities. There's the thought, what is in the closed envelope, that's the non-physical. Then you open the envelope, there's a photo, you had it correct, that's the physical. But that's actually a synchronicity, a Jungian synchronicity. And it is then the circle for me represents the non-physical part and the square, the physical part in that element. So it's a kind of combination of the non-physical and the physical, which is a Jungian synchronicity. And it goes even further. He in the end says that the human psyche has two elements to it, a physical and a non-physical, and it expresses itself in that way. But he said those are contradictive. They are what he called a complexio oppositorum, two opposites forming one. And squaring the circle is two opposites forming one. It's really strange how all these things are represented by squaring the circle. And it also comes out of us when we make these mandalas. So the square and the circle halo is really very, very deeply connected into us. But for me, the circle is the non-physical representing. I know it's a symbol again, and the square is a symbol for the physical. But I think it even goes a little further than just symbols.
So the square, to
Yeah.
me, the square, one side of the square is the diameter of a circle, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So if one side, if the diameter of a circle represents one side of a square, we've got a line which got two dimensions. It's got a beginning and an end, and it's finite.
Yeah.
The
Yes.
circle, its relationship to the circle is one where there's a finite relationship to something which is infinite.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if we have a physical life where we're
Yeah.
born and we die, and we wonder about whether or not we have an eternal soul, or whether consciousness is eternal, or there's this relationship to the divine, which is infinite. The circle represents potentially that relationship, right? That connection to us, in that we have a finite life, and during that finite life, we try to understand what our relationship is to the eternal, which is the circumference of the circle. That's one way I've looked at it over the years.
Okay. Yeah.
The other way is left and right brain. They're opposites. They work completely differently, and yet we somewhere in the middle, where we get this left brain, right brain thing, and we've got to try and navigate the world where some of us are more predisposed to making connections between things that don't look like they're connected, and others are more logical and linear, and other people kind of, I suppose, have varying different.
Again, that's also a complexio oppositorum. The most famous complexio oppositorum and the most easiest to understand is light. We know that light can behave like waves. It's when you do a double slit experiment, you will see there's a wave function involved, and it can also express itself as particles. And it does that at the same time, even though the particles and the waves are totally excluding themselves. It's a particle or it's a wave. And they're even opposite. And still, in light, both actually happen at the same time. It's one of the most, famous complexio oppositorums I know of. And I find it fascinating that just light is doing that. The most misunderstood and not recognized phenomenon in the world. For instance, how is it possible that when light comes in existence, so when you switch on your light in your room at night, and then suddenly there's light, that those light waves or particles, whatever it is, they immediately have the speed of light. So they're not speeding up from 0 to the speed of light really fast. No, that's not happening. They are straight away the speed of light. And when they disappear, they're straight gone. And that is something that physics cannot even explain. So how is it that light does not have to speed up when you switch the light on? So there's this photon comes into existence, but it immediately has the speed of light. It's fascinating.
It's immediately traveled at that speed. Yeah.
Yes.
Did you know something I learned recently, right? This is just an aside, but did you know that pyramid, do you know what the meaning of the word pyramid is?
No, I don't.
Light measure.
I didn't know that.
Pyre, the PY comes from pyre, PYRE, which is fire. And the mid comes from medios or medos, which is to measure. So isn't it interesting that the pyramid at Giza encodes the speed of light, and the actual meaning of the word pyramid is light measure?
It's fascinating, because now I am not religious in the traditional sense. I'm very spiritual, and I think God is inside of me.
Yeah.
But there's also people that think, and for them, God is outside of them. And I study that because I'm fascinated by it. And now when you look at Jesus, for instance, when he's depicted with a halo, it's always fourfold geometry. But when they depict God with a halo, it's always threefold geometry. It's always a triangle in the shape of a pyramid. Just go to churches. There are different churches in England where you will find a depiction of God with a halo, and you will see it's a triangle. It's fascinating. Yeah, it's very fascinating.
The other thing was this, because what we're talking about here is the relationship to the physical and the metaphysical, right?
Yes.
And consciousness is this non-physical. we can say,
Yes.
can't we? Right. So
Yeah.
one of the things that I loved from Scott Onstott's book, because I studied language and communication at university, and it's been a passion of mine, semiotics. He uses this phrase, which I think is so good. Language is a map, and consciousness is the territory.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, so now transfer,
Interesting character, this Scott.
isn't it? Now transfer the word language to number and geometry is the map, and consciousness is the territory. So consciousness being completely immaterial, we got our physical bodies, we've got our minds, and we got this language that we've developed, these sounds. I mean, he used the example, manzana means apple in Spanish. It's just sounds, right? The meaning of the word comes from us, comes from our consciousness. The word itself doesn't contain the meaning.
True. That's totally true. That's interesting, because in 2023, last year, I met a man at Silbury Hill. You know, it's this strange coincidences that you don't bump into people. And he was, I was there with a group. I will tell you a little more. I was there with a group, and we always meet strange people when I'm with the group. And there's this man off the path, actually the sideway, the sidewalk at the road, in the field. And he's standing there holding a crystal ball. And I think, what is this? So I stopped, I looked at him, he came over to me. What he was doing, he was making photos of Silbury Hill through his crystal ball. And I thought, oh, that's actually brilliant. Okay. That will be really nice photos, actually.
Yeah.
But somehow he said, we got to talk, and he showed how our language, especially the English language, because that was his mother tongue, that all the words we use have all deeper meanings. And so he would break them up in little pieces and said, now listen to the sounds of that. And then he would have whole stories around it, of which I thought, oh wow, that makes total sense. Even though I've already forgotten what you said, it feels like it's right. I was fascinated by that man. So he was just showing that language is has very strange qualities to it, and that's the reason why you have to watch which words you use, because some words will trigger something else in their sounds in other words. I thought it was fascinating.
It's very fascinating, very fascinating. I mean, when I first learned, there's a favorite book of mine called Spell of the Sensuous by a man called David Abrams, and it's very it's a book on phenomenology, really, about how we experience the world as like a from Heidegger, that sort of perspective. And what was it he says? We create an alphabet, and we've got these symbols for the sound that represent the sounds that we make. Okay, but when we read, we don't really realize that we're using our eyes to hear our own voices in our heads.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And our eyes, when it's very true, isn't it? And when we were storytellers for thousands of years, we just told stories before we wrote things down. Then our eyes were never ever used as hearing objects, as hearing organs, but we changed them when we learned to write. True,
yeah, interesting, because as you know, I live a great deal of the year in Arizona, and we have reservations here with the Navajo natives and Hopis. They actually, perhaps they have it now, and it can be they still don't have a written language. It can be if they do have a written language now, it's because they mimic sounds with little letters like we have invented, but for actually their lives, they never had a written language. It all went oral. It was always straight from sound in your head, not through writing. I've been to one supermarket here that actually had writing on the wall. Actually, it was writing on the wall, literally, because they were advertising things. I was there with my sister, and she said that can actually not be true, because they never wrote anything down. It's just they're mimicking their sounds here, but they're not really writing things down. It's really interesting.
I thought I heard in the Second World War that they used Navajo as a language to fool the Germans with, because the Germans used to encode stuff in Navajo, and they used to have an Indian translator when they sent messages to each other at each end, so that they could.
Yeah,
I
that
don't know if
can
that's
be.
true or not.
Can be, and it can be that some tribes did have some writing. I think this was actually what we looked at was Apache,
Mm.
and my sister was sure and said no, and I looked it up, and I don't know when they started writing down things, but they never did. It was just oral and
Oral.
interesting. Yeah,
And the other,
oral just
thing, just oral transmissions. Yeah.
storytelling.
The other thing that's interesting about, you probably noticed as well, the Navajo language, is they don't have any verbs.
Oh, I
Sorry,
don't
they
know
don't have
actually.
any. They don't have any nouns. I beg your pardon. It's only verbs.
Oh, I don't
So
know.
so their
I never studied
yeah.
that.
So their language, Bert, is more like mathematics, because it's always describing processes. So if you said to if I said to you, I'm wearing a new shirt, okay,
Yeah, yeah,
a Navajo person would tell you that they're shirting,
they're
that they're
shirting
actually in the
new.
process of, yeah, yeah. It's something that's happening rather than it is a fixed thing.
Correct.
Think
Yeah, no,
about
I didn't know that. I actually didn't know that.
think about the
I
world you would live in if you just had
Yeah,
a language that didn't have anything that was fixed. It was always like, so for a
always in movement.
wave, if they describe a wave, we would think about the little thing that's on top of the ocean that's just moving along, but they would be describing the process that's making the whole wave move, more like mathematics.
Interesting. Yeah, it's all in movement the whole time.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, wow. Now I learned something. There you have it.
Cool stuff. It's cool stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
coincidences. Jung
Yes.
wrote about coincidences.
Yeah.
And you and I both know that when you encounter the crop circles, at sooner or later, and it's usually in the first sort of introduction to them, if you're the sort of person like you and I are that grab it with both horns and go for it, the coincidences go off the charts, don't they?
Yeah. And again, Jung wrote something about it, which is, again, very, very fascinating. He said that once you recognize coincidences, these synchronicities, and you start focusing on them, and now it comes, they will happen more. And he said it's not like the broken arm syndrome, that because you have a broken arm, now suddenly everybody has a broken arm because you're focusing on it. No, it's in absolute numbers, it will increase. So once you start interacting with synchronicities, you really recognize them, they start popping up more. It's really fascinating how it works. He did not know, but he said it's a phenomenon that happens. So you get more and more and more synchronicities, not because you are focusing on, not aware, because you're aware of them and you're alert now, you pay attention. No, they really, in absolute number, increase. That's fascinating. So somehow you put something in movement, in motion, in a greater reality that makes that happen. I find that fascinating.
It is, isn't it? It really, really is. But the connection between interacting with these geometrical shapes, which, as you're suggesting, are connected to this thing in consciousness
Yeah,
that is
and
about
it,
synchronicity.
it goes through yourself as well. So when you interact with shapes and you don't even have to do it on a conscious level, you will get in your state of mind will alter. You get in another state of mind. And in the other state of mind, you can become more aware of synchronicities. And then they start happening more, like Jung said, in absolute number. So being in these shapes in the fields can trigger a lot of synchronicities. It's a really complex process, but again, it's very fascinating that that happens. Now, Jung went that far that he said there's no real time involved. So the two things, the non-physical and the physical, he said, come into existence at the same time, but not in our reality yet. So they're there now, and then one can come in reality, and then a day later the other. And if the non-physical comes first, you have a dream, and then the physical appears. You say, "Oh, you see, the dream was true." and you think I had a vision, and so this time element, he said, that's just something that we need seemingly, but it's not really there. And now you get that strange thing that things can go back in time even. What was her name? Catherine Moultwood, who did this study of the strange shapes in the landscape around Glastonbury, and she recognized the whole zodiac in the landscape.
Oh yeah.
That when you really start studying that, then it's thinkable actually that her eager to discover these shapes went a little bit back in time, influencing people who were planning roads and planning houses to do it in such a way that the shapes that Catherine was, that's Jungian stuff. It's really amazing how that seemingly can happen going back in time. I mentioned that in my book. You will get to that point that
I'll get to that point.
Does happen.
It's a great book, Bert. I'm really enjoying reading it. I mean, I've only had it a couple of days. I picked it up a couple of days ago, and I've just got 100 and odd pages straight away. I find it, and obviously I relate because I've been around all this landscape, and I've had lots of strange coincidences and experiences along my journey. So this thing about intuition, then.
Yes.
So thinking, feeling. Jung said thinking, feeling. This is the way we experience the world. Thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition. The fourth part of that quaternity. We're in a world at the moment. The only way that people can be deceived in the way that they're being deceived is because they're not listening to their intuition. So we seem to have switched it off.
Yeah.
I
said, I just did a whole series of lectures, and that was partly about the book, about shapes and geometries and Jungian psychology. And then in the end, I posed the question from what is the biggest threat that you're facing? And for me, that is artificial intelligence. And the only thing you can do to really determine if something is based on reality or is it based on artificial intelligence is actually use your intuition in it. So you cannot even do the research in it. You cannot do it intellectually. You can come a really long way with that. But in the end, the final decision is, what do you feel about it? What does it tell your inner voice about it? And I think that's actually where we should focus much more. I know a few years back, there were all these things, and did you do the research and that? And there was all these conspiracy theories, and I would tell them, say, no, and I'm not going to do the research. Yeah, I do to get the facts, but that's about it. I'm not going to base my final decision on the research. I will base my final decision on my intuition. What do I feel about it? And that will be the final say for me. So I agree. Intuition is highly underestimated. We should much more focus on that.
And so doesn't the practice of sacred geometry, so we're talking about, and this is another thing that takes a while to get your head around. It took me some time. Qualitative aspect of number and geometry versus the quantitative.
Yeah.
And the qualitative, when you talk about something having a threeness, a quality of threeness. And I always use that example when you say, like we used to say to children, have you learnt your ABCs? If you said, have you learnt your ABs? Or have you learnt your ABCDs? It doesn't feel right. It just feels right. And advertisers picked up on this, didn't they? They always do things in threes, take back control. Beans means Heinz. Things that come in threes, they speak to our intuition.
Interesting, because I in my novel about Tesla, hunting Tesla, there's many points where I describe something in sets of 3 words: this, and that. And I never really thought about it. That felt just good for me to do it that way. And sometimes the words are just synonyms, and you think, but the 3 words are saying exactly the same. That can be, but it feels nice to say it in 3 different words. And I never thought about it, but you now say with this ABC, that makes sense. 2 won't work, 4 also will not work, but 3 do work.
3 just fits.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And so It's isn't it? And so just thinking about, okay, how do we, if we were going to go about the practice of rebuilding our intuition, or because intuition can be wildly wrong, and it's
Yeah.
something that has to be, it's like a muscle, it has to be trained, doesn't it? Because you can feel you're 100% certain about something and you got it right, and then, I mean, but what's the example? If you say to somebody, if I fold this sheet of paper 7 times, is the maximum I can fold it, yeah? We can't fold paper more than 7 times because it just that's the point
Then
where you
it
can't make a
gets so
crease
thick.
anymore.
Yeah.
But if I say to you, theoretically, if I could theoretically fold this paper 100 times, how thick would it be? And people will say 100 feet, or as big as a tall skyscraper. And when you say no, it'd be thick as the known universe because of exponential growth.
Yeah.
The intuition you realize was way off in what you estimated or felt it would be. And so training your intuition, I think, like by working with geometry and working with threeness and working with the qualities of number through geometry, I wonder if Jung realized or was doing this, where he was gradually getting people to come back to themselves and start to rely on their own intuition.
Yeah, again, that's a fascinating subject. So Jung, all his work that he did, that was in a way theoretically, and he only could show it empirically that he was right, because within synchronicities, it is. Let's see, how does he say that? That's things that are connected but not in a causal way. There's no causality between the two events, the thinking of and the calling. But the lack of causality means you cannot say this is causing that. And that's all what science does. So you could never prove it because science is looking for causalities. Why does it happen? This happens because of that. But Jung had defined his thing in a way that you could not do that. It had to be empirical. And then this guy came along, Joseph Banks Rhine. He was working at the Durham University, I think, I don't know, somewhere in America. But his big question was, do we humans have a sixth sense? And he tested that with cards. So he had the kind of playing cards, and people had to guess them. And there were 5 different cards. He called them the Zener cards. And if you just guess, you will guess 20% correct. That's just guessing if you have 5 different cards.
Yeah.
But it turned out that some people were much better. So they actually had a much better developed intuition. Now, it's a long story, but in the end, what he came up with is, let's train. Let's see if we can improve ourselves. And it turned out he couldn't. So the people that were good stayed good in the end, and the people who just cast 20%, they could never get over that. It's really fascinating. He could not find a way to train that you could improve your intuition. I think you can.
Interesting.
But likely we have to do that in ways that are way outside of the box we think we should do it. But he couldn't achieve it. Actually, he achieved first the opposite. They were becoming worse.
Wow.
And then he noticed
I thought
they lose their interest, and it had to do with their state of mind that it became worse. But so when he got the state of mind going again, the score went up again. And it's in that state of mind where the secret lies. That if you can get into certain states of minds, but he couldn't figure it out. He could not make them better. Yeah. Again,
did he talk about what methods he used? Did he talk about what methods he used to try and
train? He just repeated what he was doing. So you cast the cards, you cast it right, you get good feedback, so you cast them again. But what you do is you just keep doing the same thing, and likely that doesn't work that well. So you have to practice in a whole different way. And I think that state of mind observation, I think there lies the secret. We have to do something with our state of mind to become better in our intuition. And guess what? Shapes and geometry do something to your state of mind. Companies use that as logos because they know that it does that. And so it can
exactly
be that that's the reason. Yeah, it can be that's the reason why we are suddenly so good in predicting the future in a way when we're in crop circles. And then when you're back home, you think, "Wow,
Well,
I
this is
lost all the capability."
what, yeah. But Scott Onstock talked about when he, we and Karen Alexander and Michael and everybody, John Michel used to say, if you work with the geometry, not just looking at the pictures, if you get the compass and the straight edge out and the pencil and you start doing it and you start to actually, it's like, what's that saying? I used it with Scott. It's there used to be an old advertising logo and it said, show me and I will see, tell me and I will hear, involve me and I will understand. And if you get involved in the geometry, if you actually do it, you know what it's like, Bert. Something else happens, doesn't it?
It's true.
My thesis is that it would improve intuition because it brings up that quality where it's like one of my favorite films on philosophy is called Being in the World by Hubert Dreyfus. It's again on phenomenology, and he talks about that we really get to understand consciousness by connecting with objects in the world. So he talks about a guitarist and the fact that this guitarist is expressing number in time, music through this instrument, but it's his connection to it, his tactile connection that feeds back into his consciousness and gets him to experience himself. And then he talks about a Japanese carpenter. And he says when you first start to hit a hammer, because the Platonic way of trying to understand a hammer will be to list all its properties. It will be, the handle is 9 inches and it's made of this wood, and it lists off all the different properties of it. Whereas Heidegger's theory was, if you want to understand a hammer, pick it up and hit some nails in with it. And when we do that as human beings, when we first start practicing a skill, we have to think about it a lot. But after a while, when we get good at it, we don't think anymore. And it's when we're not thinking and we're just doing it that we're feeling. And I think that's the same with the geometry. If you're drawing the geometry, and once you've got the hang of using the compass and the straight edge and you're familiar with the shapes that your basic squares and circles and triangles, then you don't think anymore. And then you start to feel. And that's when I think you could train your intuition. It's my theory. I don't know if it's true or not.
Yeah, that could be. I think you're pretty in the right direction there. It's because it's not for nothing that you get the best ideas when you take a shower, because that's actually the place where you don't think. You just let everything go and you just enjoy the water and that, and suddenly things pop in your head. It's true. It's when you can shut off your thinking, you have more chance to actually have good intuition. Now, one of the fascinating things that I mention in my book, it's a story from a German guy, Jan Schochow, and I met him in Wiltshire years ago, and he is a graphical designer, and he came across the work of Wolfgang Schindler. And Schindler was a German guy who studied crop circles of the old days. Those were with circles and rings and pathways and another circle and boxes, very simplistic designs. And Wolfgang Schindler discovered all these strange geometries in it. By making tangential lines, he could see all these pentagrams popped up. Now, Jan Schochow studied all kinds of German crop circles, and he found the same thing. All these pentagrams, connections to tram lines, and then it turned out that all these circles were hoaxed. So Jan Schochow was really shocked, but then he thought, well, wait a minute, all that geometry is still there. So he knew actually the people that hoaxed it, and he asked them, did you use any diagrams, or did you have any ideas on forehand what to make? And they would say, no, why would we? It was simple designs. We made a circle pathway, another circle, a ring around it, a few boxes left and right. We just did things, but they did exactly the right thing. They got involved in that process, and then without them knowing it, they did exactly the right thing in the field. And that's, again, they got actually involved in it, and somehow they got connected to this whatever is there, and they made exactly the correct shapes to make the geometry possible. Again, it's a fascinating world.
I've got Wolfgang's papers that he drew all those years ago. I've got them downstairs. They're amazing.
They are amazing. And Jan Schochow was also amazed by them. And then Yeah, he found all that stuff in Germany, and then it turned out man-made, and still it's there. So, and that same thing goes for Stonehenge. That square in the circle is there because somehow these people got involved and tapped something or whatever motivated them to put the stones in the way they did. And then when they were finished, they had actually created square in the circle without them knowing that they were doing that on a conscious level.
That's I mean, you talk about the chances of things in your book, when you start going about, the odds of this and then the odds of that, and it gets ridiculous. Well, the odds of that are ridiculous, Bert, aren't they?
It is. Yeah, they are. And so I think we're underestimating parts of what's around us. We have still not discovered a lot of things. And I don't know also how to go about it other than switch your thinking off and turn your feeling on and just feel actually everything around you. And hopefully you will get insights that you think, oh, but now I understand it. I have had these, everybody has it, that you had a dream, and in that dream you knew exactly how it all was. And you thought, wow, I know exactly how it all works. And it's so simple. I cannot even believe that I never realized this before. And then you wake up and you have forgotten the dream. You only know that the experience, that you knew everything, that you knew exactly how it all works, and it was really simple. And I think you actually did know it at that moment, but then you wake up and it's gone. But somehow it's there, and we just cannot grasp it. It's there that we know it also. And we say, oh man, that's simple. Yeah, no, I'm sure. Let's have a pint, guys. We have figured it out now.
The same is true actually when you work with psychedelic plants. You go into this sort of state of consciousness, and if you're Terence McKenna used to say that the psychedelic experience should be done with people who who you're on a level with, so you're in the right setting. Yeah. And he used a metaphor, analogy really, of going fishing. He said it's like, imagine you've got 6 souls all sitting together in a room, and you've taken some mushrooms, and you're going out on your psychedelic trip, and it's a boat to go out fishing, right? And but we're not fishing for fish. We're fishing for good ideas. Yeah. So he says, what we want to do is we don't want to catch minnows. We don't want to play with little ideas. We want to get some, and we don't want to pull monsters onto the boat, ones that we're never going to get to the end of. We want medium-sized ideas that we can get on the boat and we can wrestle with them together, the 5 or 6 of us, and then see if we can come up with something that we can bring into the world. And it's by having 6 of them or having half a dozen of them that you've wrestled with it together, that when you come back off the trip, because that often happens, you have the greatest of revelations and think, I've sorted it. It's all sussed. And then the next day you go, I don't remember anymore. It's not so clear anymore, just like that dream quality. So maybe we that's an answer as well.
Strange,
maybe that's where...
So I have done 1 or twice some cactus. What
peyote?
It's called. Yeah, it's not peyote, I think, but
San Pedro.
Pretty much related to it. But you get, of course, in an altered state of mind. And one day when I did that, now you can really say it, I went to the bathroom and we have all these tiles, and I looked at the tiles and I saw all these strange figures in it, humans and animals and objects and that. And I sat there and said, wow, I could see them all. And I never had seen it before. Now, you would think that the next day when it's all gone and you look at these tiles again, also these shapes are gone. And that's not true. When I went back to the bathroom the next day and I looked, I still saw the same shapes. I only had never seen them before. It took that Wachuma to actually open myself up to recognize the shapes. But once I'd recognized them, the next day when the Wachuma was gone, I could still see them. And I thought, that is really fascinating again. It opened me up, and it's not that it was an illusion. It's actually really there. I only never saw it. Fascinating again.
You said some great pearls of wisdom to me over the years, Bert. And one of them was you have, yeah. One of them that stuck with me, and I've mentioned it. I've quoted you and cited you for it ever since. Was you said that when you examine a crop circle, for example, in, let's say 1996, and you say it in the book too, you come back 10 years later maybe and look at that crop circle again and then discover something that was always there, but you didn't see it before.
Yeah.
And that's the moment when you said you realized it wasn't the crop circle that changed, it was you that had changed.
Yes.
Now
that's again a fascinating thing. So my very first crop circle, and you've read it in my book, was this actually simple design, kind of quintuplet. It was one big circle with 4 circles around it. And I made a diagram of that, and the diagram sat on my desk for I don't know how long, and sometimes on the wall. I have looked at it, and for me it was just a big circle and 4 small circles. Until 10 years, I recognized it was actually defining squaring the circle. But it had done that all those 10 years. I only didn't see it. It needed me to seemingly look at the world differently to recognize, oh wow, so simple. Now the big question here is, how much are we still missing? Because now I proved myself from, oh, that was always there, and now I see it. Yeah, now I recognize it. So how much have I not seen yet? And I'm sure 10 years we will talk again, and we'll say, whoa, yeah, here, remember that talk? Now I looked at it again, and now I saw that. That always has been there, but it took me 30 years to recognize it. It can be. yeah, open your eyes and you will see. Brilliant.
There you
been to that church? You've been there?
I haven't been to it. No, but now I've read that, I didn't even know if it existed. Now I've read it, that I'm going to get straight over there because I've got to go and feel that picture and see what.
Be not disappointed. The painting or the painting is actually pretty small. It looks big in the book and that, but it's a pretty small thing. When I show it to people, when we go there with groups, they're always a little disappointed. They expect a huge, big painting on the wall. It's actually not. It's pretty small, but it's so small. Now you get another thing. It's so small that when you see it, you wouldn't expect it to be something special. But I got drawn to it. And I got my camera out and made photos. I got even Frank Lauman involved because he had a much longer lens than I had. He said, Frank, you have to make a picture of that little thing there. You could not get to it because the door was locked. You only could, when you moved the curtain a little bit aside, you could see it sitting there. And said, make a photo because there is something with it that's important. And it's only then that we realized, oh, wow, look at the eyes. It's eyes open, eyes closed. It's just your reflection of where you're at, with your state of mind, if you see it open or closed. And yes, Jesus said, open your eyes and you will see. Why was I so attracted by that? Because when you go there, you will see it's pretty small. You think, oh yeah, it's just a little small painting sitting there. But something urged me to make a photo, urged me to study that deeper. And again, where does that come from? What is that inner voice that makes me do that? And can I get it more louder so it tells me more better things?
I'll tell you a funny story.
Research. Yeah. Sorry?
Do you remember? I'll tell you a funny story. Do you remember? Yeah. Do you remember the crop circle at Chute Causeway in 2007? It was It was a pentagon with lots of pentagram stars inside it.
Pentagrams. Yes.
Okay, I took my mum to that. I took my mum to that crop circle, and she'd never been to a crop circle before. And it was because she, 777 had happened to me a week or two before that she's like, now, on the case. Or your screen's froze. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still there. And I can hear you.
Oh, good. So, okay, here's what happened, and this is a crazy story, but these crazy stories exist.
Yeah.
So I take my mum in there, right, and we walk in, and she's never been inside a crop circle before. She's like, oh right, okay, this is what it looks like, and so I wander around. I point out a few features to her, and then people are coming in. It's a busy time, and so people are coming over to me to chat, and then eventually, my mum wanders off. And then after I'd finished speaking to some people, I look around and I can't find her. She's disappeared, right? Where is she? So I'm looking around. It's quite a big formation, so it's, it's not something you can get around quickly. And then all of a sudden, I see a head pop up from behind some wheat over there, right? So I walk over to her, and she's and her fingers are completely covered in sticky, wet mud. Okay, all her fingernails are full of mud, and I'm like, what have you been doing? And she said, I don't know what it is. She said, I saw this stone on the ground, and I thought, I've got to get that stone. I've got to pick it up, right? She said, but as soon as I started to pick it up, I realized it was buried in the ground. So I started to dig all the earth away from it, and it's all wet and sticky because I think it had rained. It must have rained. And it ended up that it was a great big stone, right? But she had to get it. She said, I just had to get it. But now, so she's wrapped it in a tissue, this big stone, and putting it in her handbag, and her fingers are completely caked in mud. Okay. At that precise moment, Terry Toffness, the filmmaker from Norway who made that documentary, he walks into the crop circle. Okay, so I said, "Oh, Terry, let me introduce you to my mum." Right, so I said, "Mum, this is Terry. We just made a film together about 777." So I said, "This is the man who made the film." So my mum said, "Oh, I won't shake your hand because," and she looked at her hands and they were completely clean, Bert. No mud, nothing under her fingernails.
Oh,
nothing.
Man, that's weird. Oh,
you should have seen her. You should have seen her face.
Oh man,
she
get the shivers from that.
It was literally 60 seconds after she's going, oh my God, look at the state of me. And then she's sort of holding her hands like this. This man comes in. She goes, oh, hello. Look, I won't shake your hand because, and they're gone.
Wow.
And so
amazing.
So two elements. I know, two elements to that story, right? One, most people wouldn't believe it, but it happened. But she just felt this urge to get this stone.
That urge, yeah.
And that's what you're talking about, isn't it? It's something where you just go, I've just got to go there.
Yep. And the thing is, so listen to it. Most people have that urge, but then they actually talk themselves out of it again and overrule it. But you want to start digging. That's good. Carry on.
Well, that's it. That's the story. But so what I was going to say was,
you said there were 2 points: that urge and
the urge, and the second point, obviously the magic point, was the fact that somehow her fingers were cleaned.
So some parallel reality that actually kicked in, and you never noticed it.
I have no explanation for it whatsoever, Bert. All I can tell you is that I was there, Paula was there, and my mum, obviously it happened to her, and she honestly, it looked, she had been digging in the wet, sticky mud, and for that to have just completely cleaned out of her nails, it looked like she'd been for a manicure.
Wow, fascinating. You know what another beautiful thing with crop circles is, and this is a very nice example of that. So this happens, and it never happened likely before, and it never happened afterward. Now, the thing with crop circles I've noticed is that sometimes you think, oh, I know now how it all works. And at that moment, it does something else again. So it's so fascinating. You can never get your finger around it. I know when I met Michael Clinton, and in 1996 we went to the Julia set, and he dragged me along. He said, I discovered something, Bert. You had all these crop circles that look like thought bubbles. So you had smaller and a whole series of bigger. The Julia set was that as well, in a way. Small circle and bigger, and then smaller again. He said the biggest circle is always at the highest point on a slope. So they're always on the slope, and the biggest is on the highest point. And so he measured that in the Julia set at Stonehenge, and yes, it was true again. So he said, I'm going to write an article about this, because we have discovered now something that can really bring us steps forward in this whole phenomenon. He had not even written it, so nobody knew about it. The very first thought bubble that comes after that did not have it. I thought, yeah, it taught me the lessons that every time you think you know, it does something else.
Well, it was like
Or
back
you
in the
need,
early days when they said, I think it was Terence Meaden when he said it was plasma vortexes, and he said that
yeah,
it must be ball lightning because the crop is being swirled in a clockwise direction. It's because we're in the
yeah,
northern
said
hemisphere.
that, yeah.
And then the next day, one came and it was the other way. And then
That stuff, yeah. And it's like these dead flies that Janet found at Cher Hill.
yes,
I think one
yes,
or two crop circles after that showed these flies. I was there when she discovered that there were dozens and dozens, hundreds of them. There were so many, and that's the only time I really saw that.
yeah,
Then before that, I'd never seen it. After
yeah.
that, I've seen one or two flies, but never anymore this colossal amount. And how is that? Why is it that one thing? It's like if you don't get it straight away, you won't get it. So we're not going to show it a second time.
Yeah, yeah.
Something like that.
And so that's it, isn't it? Right. That's the point I think I wanted to come to now, is that we've talked about how you train possibly your intuition so that you can listen to yourself
Yeah.
better.
Yes.
How you train yourself to notice more. So there's a correlation between psychedelic plants that open your eyes to something, and then afterwards you can be in a new world now because now you're seeing something that was always there but you didn't notice it before. Your world got bigger.
Yes.
And I know for you and I, and for everybody else that's taken the circles seriously over the years, our worlds get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger the more we dive into these mysteries, don't they, Bert?
Yeah, and it doesn't matter actually what or who makes them somehow.
No.
It's
Secondary,
because
isn't it?
even if that's totally not relevant, even these German circles showed that to me very clearly that these guys, I even knew these guys as well, that they just did something, but they did exactly the right thing because somehow they followed without them knowing it, their intuition. And so what they made was very profound, even though they made it. And sometimes people say, yeah, but that's not really, if it's man-made and I cannot take it serious. So I don't know. There's a lot of paintings that are very profound and very deep, and they will touch you and they will open you up. But all paintings are man-made. But some of them are made with some kind of higher voice is difficult if you paint, but with a higher motivation that to paint just the right things in a way that somebody else get touched by it and it opens them up. It's like the Bernini designed the square at the Vatican. The St. Pete's Square is designed by Bernini. In that square, you will find 3 times squaring the circle. Very obvious. You cannot even miss it. Once you focus on that, you will see it. Did Bernini did that on purpose? Did he know what he was doing? Or again, was he just tapping some higher whatever? He made that square and he did exactly the right thing. I find again, it's so strange how that works, how your inner voice is helping you. The only thing is listen to it. When I found that church, that was my tom-tom telling me, my navigator, from here, you want to go there. I could have totally ignored it and think, no, I go to Wiltshire because I want to go to the pub. I want to have a pint. I'm thirsty. But somehow I didn't. I thought, no, let's take a turn here. Let's go there. Why? What happened there? And who is talking to who? Is it me talking to myself? I think sometimes it is actually.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, yeah.
So why is my voice not louder? Why can I not hear it more often? It's fascinating.
I don't know. I mean, I know I know the times in my life when it's been so loud, it's been so clear. My voice saying, "Do this, go there," and it's unquestionable. And other times you're not sure. You're going, "Am I hearing that? Should I go this way?" And you're not sure. And you're apprehensive.
I'm fooling myself.
So there's a couple of other things I wanted to bring up from what have come to mind with the conversation. Have you heard of Jeffrey Kripal?
No.
Okay,
No.
he's a professor at Rice, I think, I think he's at Rice University on religious history and studies of the supernatural and the way that people have experienced supernatural things happening forever.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote a book called Authors of the Impossible. Now, I'm asking you this because you're a writer.
Yeah.
And he makes the assertion, he gives several examples throughout the book. And let me give you a couple of them, right? One of them is from Mark Twain. I think most people have heard of him.
Yeah.
He was, writing, and he had a vision of his brother who had died, wearing white, laying on a table on a paddle steamer with a bunch of roses on his chest. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
3 days later, he receives a telegram to say his brother had died, and he had to travel to where his body was. He gets there, and he's on a paddle steamer on a table. And he walks in, he's wearing white. Everything in the picture fits, except he's got no roses on his chest. Okay. And then a woman walks in and puts a bunch of roses on his chest while he's standing there.
I love this stuff. Yeah.
So the other story is of a fiction writer who's in his den, and he's trying to come up with ideas for the part of what's happening next in the story of his fictional book. Okay. And so the part of the book he's writing about is these robbers, these bandits, breaking into this house and tying up the wife and the kids, and tying them up while they're robbing the house. Okay. So he finishes writing that part of the book, goes into the house, and his wife and children have been tied up by some robbers that had come into the main house and robbed the place. And he didn't know it. He was just writing it, thinking it was coming to him as an idea from the den, right? And there's a bunch of other stories throughout this book. And so Kripal's assertion is that language is paranormal. And it mixes between the physical and the metaphysical, just like we were saying earlier with Scott Onstott saying language is the map and consciousness is the territory. And that in the act of writing, in the act of imagining, in the act of doing this thing, we can flick forward or backwards in time. Time doesn't have any meaning anymore. It can change on us. It can morph, and then we get to realize that reality isn't as fixed as we think it is. That's his assertion in the book. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm really fascinated by that. You asked me from what are you up to an hour ago, I think. And so I wrote this book, The Organizing Principle. Now, one of the things that is in my back of my head is a book that's going to be called The Organizing Principle at Work. And because one of the things with this strange synchronicity thing is that you cannot prove it. That's within the definition. We talked about that. But the other thing that you can do is you can give enough examples that it has to be something. So it was with the cards of Rhine. He could not prove it, but he had enough examples from people who could actually guess it more than statistical, what you would think statistically. So what this guy wrote down, I want to have, you mentioned his name just a moment there, but please send me that in a message, because it's that what I think where we are missing the point yet. And so a whole book with examples of Mark Twain. I have lots of these examples, what you just said, a whole book full, and hopefully there's so many examples that people will come to the conclusion there's some basic law underlying this. There's something under there that is not a coincidence anymore. It's a kind of organizing principle. There's a principle that takes care of that. And so that's one of the projects that's here, and it will be published in 2 years from now.
Well, there's the coincidence then, Bert. So I think you need to read that book. You need to.
Yeah, I need for sure. I need to have that book. Yeah, I want to have that book. And it's fascinating that somewhere in the 1800s, a group of people had some kind of little come together every week. They decided to write a book about this kind of phenomenon. And so there's a book from the 1800s that has hundreds of examples of mothers that suddenly see their sons being killed in action in a certain way. And then it turned out it was exactly that way. Or what you said with the brother with the flowers and that. It's massive amount of examples that cannot be a coincidence anymore. There's something laying under that, what I call the organizing principle, that we have still no idea how it works and how we can really interact with it. Because in the moment you can interact with it, you can perhaps let it work for you. So you can actually create a reality which is very profitable for you, for your life and for your evolution. But somehow we've totally not looked into that field enough.
This I think, what you're talking about now, I think is what human beings have as a potential, and it's
Yes.
about finding the methodology and how to bring that out, how to have some
How
kind of
to bring
structure
that
that
out? Yeah.
yeah.
And
I mean,
then
I know that with
take it serious, because most people will have it partly, but they just ignore it. And I know there's mind chatter and there's a lot of things that you get fooled by your inner voice. That's totally true. That happens to me, of course, as well. But there's also many times that your inner voice is not fooling you, but you're just ignoring it. Then
yeah.
your tom-tom says you're in the car, you have to go to the right, but somehow actually your feeling is you have to go left. But yeah, tom-tom is saying right, so you go right, and then there it is, big accident. You get into backed up traffic, and you sit there for hours. When you would have gone left, you would have gone around it, and it would have been totally fine.
It's so
It's that
true.
stuff.
Everybody's experienced that. Everybody, haven't they? At
Yes.
some time, everybody will have experienced that. So, Mike, I've told you this before. I think the last time we spoke, actually, we were talking about this. And again, as you say, it's not empirically testable, verifiable. But
No,
my
that's
teacher
the
used to
problem.
say, he used to say that we think on planet Earth, we think in terms of cause and effect.
Yeah.
But at the higher levels of organization, at the level of organization that created the universe, that put these things together that shouldn't go together, and that's what something came to me earlier. He talked about corn. Corn, maize.
Yeah. Yeah.
That the reason that the Indians, the Navajo and stuff, revered that was because it was two grasses bred that shouldn't have never go together. It's like mixing a cat and a dog. It's two opposites that make corn. And so there was something that they saw is special in that, because I think it's this principle in the universe that you were talking about, right? So he used to say, this is my teacher, who's a guy who took me to the crop circles. He used to say, at higher levels of organization, Gary, he used to say, it's not cause and effect. It's cause and cause and cause and cause in synchronicity. Everything is a cause and it synchronizes. But we just get to
Fascinating.
Wow,
you're lucky with a teacher like that. Very lucky that you had somebody who could think on those levels and express it as well. Beautiful.
Well, the thing is, though, when he told me that stuff, Bert, I had no concept of, and it was like he could have been speaking to me in another language. It was like, what are you on about? It's taken 27 years for me to go.
You still remembered it. It still did enough to you that it actually stored somewhere here, even though you couldn't do anything with it at that moment, but it did get stored and you could retrieve it. My teachers have told me lots of things which I don't know anymore.
Well, you probably do on an unconscious level, and you just go about the world, but it's still affecting you. Yeah, definitely.
And it's still not relevant, seemingly, and it will come, perhaps, or not.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. But it's been great to talk to you, mate.
Yes, it was great. It's good to connect again, and you gave me lots of ideas. It always looks like I'm spouting all these ideas. That's not true. I'm also listening, and I heard a lot of new things. So thank you for that.
We share stuff, mate. We share stuff, don't we? We've both been on the same journey with all of this crazy stuff. So it's sharing our notes.
And don't forget to get to the title of the book that Kai that wrote about Mark Twain. So,
of course I will. Yeah, of course I will.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's it. Okay, mate. Well, we'll end it
it's
here.
Enough
Thanks
actually
so much. This is going
to keep us moving and going for a while.
I think so. Are you coming over this year?
Yes. I come over. It's a kind of celebration for Janet. You know that Janet
we didn't talk about Janet.
left us, and
yeah,
it's a whole long story. But I feel I have to go to a few very special spots in Wiltshire, just a kind of celebration of life.
Oh, that's lovely.
So,
yeah.
The first
Yeah,
year I
yeah.
decided not to come because I have no tours. And Heather and I, we decided we're not going to go to England this year. This happens and we will be back again. It's fascinating in itself. Every time when I think it's over and I stop, I'm not doing it anymore, something happens that pulls me back in. If it's a ball of light or it's people that I meet, whatever, but it pulls me back in again.
What's that saying from The Godfather, isn't it? Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in.
Yeah, it's that. It's that. Yeah. So I got rid of it and I stopped with it. First time that happens was in 2004. And then I got invited to go to America. I met my future wife there, blah, blah, blah. And we were back in Wiltshire again.
You can't escape.
You can't escape, you know.
But thanks so much, my friend. We'll talk again soon. I'll send you the details of that book. No problem.
Okay, thank you. And nice to connect again. And perhaps I will see you in the summer.